Good afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. Christian here today, introducing you to Alex Lawrence from Sysdig. We're going to be talking about the integration that we've built with Sysdig Runtime Insights. Just as a kind of context setting, what is this about? Like you saw in the keynote that we are on a mission to grab a lot of data and bring that data into the developer context in the inner loop. That's really kind of what we're trying to achieve with Scout. The goal is to greatly reduce the cognitive overload, the noise that a developer has to deal with when working locally to constantly improve their kind of security in their supply chain. And one of the great partners partnerships that we launched is with Sysdig. And we want to kind of dive a little bit deeper than what we showed in the keynote on yesterday. Seems like a long time ago. So with that, let me hand it over to Alex to show you Sysdig. I think, Alex, Sysdig is offering a free trial for everyone coming from Scout as a Scout user, so you can try this out on your own infrastructure. Alex, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So basically my goal today was to not bore you with a bunch of slides and a bunch of kind of whatever talk about random stuff, and I was just going to show you things inside of the Sysdig interface and have it really be focused on what's all about, like the stuff that's live, right? What's happening right now, and then we'll hand it over to Docker at the end to kind of show the integration into their side of the house. So I think they're trying to get the input switched real quick to have it go over to my laptop up here. There we go. And so what we're looking at right now, this is the Sysdig interface. It's all about kind of what's going on across your environment, across that whole CNAP portfolio of things. What I'm looking at right now, this is a view of cloud activity, right? So this would be live things happening against cloud configuration. And I can look at this in a couple of different ways. So right now up here, I'm looking at it by account and region, resource type, things like that. But I could say, maybe I suspect Mateo's account or somebody's account is not acting correctly. And so it lets me live search. So I can do things like Mateo up here, and it'll show me just Mateo's stuff. And then I can say, well, I only care about Mateo, maybe delete actions. So if I just start typing delete, it'll filter to any Mateo delete, right? And so I can basically look at across all of my events that I have happening in the cloud and look for very specific things, right? So I can see every time Mateo deleted something in this context. I could remove Mateo or delete, get back to all of my events and say, like, well, let's just look for any delete action and start sifting through all of my stuff live, right? So it gives me kind of that perspective of what's going on right now and what should I care about at this point in time. I can take the data and I can look at it in a number of different paradigms. So that was with cloud activity. I could look at it specifically from like what are the users doing across all of my clouds, be that AWS, Google, Azure, whatever it might be, and see it from kind of the person context. And I can do that exact same searching where I can look at anything I want. Any string term I put up here will go and do a quick search. So if I did like cluster, I could find cluster deletes or remove the deletes and look for any action that was taken against a cluster specifically. And so it lets me kind of look through all that stuff in a very kind of novel and fast way. I could also reorganize this to go away from users or cloud stuff, and I could look specifically at stuff happening in Kubernetes or containers. I can narrow it down to just pods or workloads. Basically lets me explore visually what's happening in my environment right now and what stuff should I really care about at this point in time. It's taking a second to load. Wi-Fi's, so I apologize about that. So this one's kind of fun because it's also starting to show us things that are being rejected from a particular cluster. So I can see up here I'm getting events around rejected a container because it failed a scanning evaluation, right? So if I had someone build a container, it didn't have the appropriate things passing for whatever the reason might be, I actually get events on that fail, and so I can even see kind of that level of detail where things aren't being admitted that are trying to be pushed into production. So it's really just about like all of that live data and what is it actually doing. All of this stuff is coming from this event section, but it's letting you look at it in a very visual way to explore it in context of how does your infrastructure actually look. In this view, it's kind of giving me that more traditional perspective across all of my events. What is kind of interesting about this is it does let me get pretty deep into various details of things going on, and lets me have access to a few more robust pieces of filters. So one of the things I like this for is if I am running a security organization and I have SOC concerns, or I've got particular MITRE concerns that I'm mapping to, or I'm PCI compliant, whatever the thing might be, I can start adding filters for those different compliance specifications. And then I can go and look for live violations within those different frameworks. Right now, my nearest is from 6 hours ago, so I don't have any from 10 minutes ago. But it lets me kind of say, well, I need to assure my compliance with this particular specification. Let's go look at my events holistically and see if I'm complying or not complying with a particular spec, right? So this lets me use that data in different ways and different use cases for different teams, things like that. A lot of the other stuff that we're doing around here is to integrate into our customers' lives in a more meaningful way. And so what I mean by that is too often when you're dealing with a security organization as an end user or vice versa, you're kind of talking a different dialect, so to speak. You're speaking the same language, right? But you're using different words. Oh, those words have different meanings than what you're typically used to. And so one of the really good examples here is really around, say, like posture management. It's a kind of a key area that we all have to care about. It's all about configuration, making sure that our stuff is set up in a way that is hardened and appropriate. And most of the time, it's looking at specifications. Again, things like PCI, like NIST, best practices around Kubernetes, containers, Docker, whatever it might be. At the end of the day, you generally end up getting things like this, right? You get reports about misconfiguration. So as a security professional, my job is to basically say, okay, I'm going to go prioritize what I think are the most important things for my teams to go and fix, and then I'm going to go give them this, this report. I'm going to go download it as a PDF, and I'm going to go hand it to them like over the wall or whatever, and then say, go fix all these things. And they're basically going to say, great, security gave me this gigantic list of things to do. I have to go look up every single misconfiguration. I have to go look up how am I going to fix that? What am I going to do? And so a lot of tools have said, okay, great. We don't want to inundate these folks with things that are erroneous or are difficult to figure out. So let's go look at things like, running as root. So they'll give you little directions, and so then they can have something they're going to follow. But wouldn't it be nice if your tool spoke the same language as your operations team, right? Or spoke the same language as your developers? And so what we're trying to do is take it a step further and say, okay, well, we've got this specification. We shouldn't be running containers as root. Yep, we all know that. So let's go find all of our root containers across our environments. And if I go highlight one of these, I can actually go and see, the particular risk, the particular containers that are violating it. I can see why they're running as root. In this case, just no one set who the user should be, so it's just defaulting to root. Okay, so let's go fix that. We can go say, run it as 1001 or whatever our value is we use at our company. And when I do that, it actually generates a patch, right? And so I can come in here, and when I open up my Jira or open up whatever my ticketing system is, I can actually include a spec that they can apply directly to the cluster and go forward with, or I could take it even a step further, and if I want to, we don't have this one linked in particular because I just picked one at random, but I can actually integrate directly into the repository, and I can open a pull request directly in their workflow. So the nice thing about this is, again, I'm not just giving a report to somebody saying, go fix these things. The security professionals are saying, okay, here's what the values should be. Go take this spec, or better yet, go review this PR and apply that to your cluster, right? So the goal here is that we're trying to take all these conversations about misconfiguration, about events, about things that we're seeing live in the environment, and trying to make them be actually actionable, right, by the end users. Because the last thing we want to do is give people big, gigantic reports they do nothing with. So in the example of the runtime context, we saw all of these great, fun events and things like that up in our insights view. But what can I actually do with something like that? So I have this event in here. Let's go find it. I believe the one I want to go look at is under Kubernetes activity. And we're going to go look for things that relate to the terminal. So we've got this event here called terminal shell and container. So this is something that we probably all have done in our lives. We've all gone into a container, popped open a shell, and gone made a configuration change. And that's probably fine in most cases. But in your production environment, probably shouldn't do it that way, right? So it's something you need to be uniquely aware of, watch for those types of events and things like that. But what actually happened when those things went on? And so if I come looking into my events, I can see that I've got a bunch of things happening. And so let's go find one in particular. And I can go look for this one here. We'll just highlight it. And the nice thing is that when you do find these events in our world, since the way we instrument is fairly deep into the nodes, it's giving you a lot of supporting data around it in particular. So in this case, I can see that someone logged in as a shell as root. They went and did a run command and pulled down some data with bash, basically did a bunch of stuff they shouldn't do, right? Gives me that whole process tree view of it all. But I can start getting a lot of context as well around the process names, the parent process that executed it, arguments passed via the parent, PIDs, all sorts of other and sundry metadata about what happened, who did it, and kind of what the context was, even down to cloud level data or Kubernetes data. The reason it matters is that when I can provide a robust set of metadata around an event, I can make, again, the event actionable. I can be able to say, hey, it was in this namespace, it was by this user, this pod, this whatever it might be, and I need to go do something about this. I need to go take this and do more, right? And so it lets me have a fair amount of data in an event that actually lets you be able to do something with it. Again, it's not about just throwing something over a wall, it's trying to give you more supporting characteristics. The other one in here that is pretty relevant, I think, for you all, and that is what we are doing with Docker, is how do we take all of this runtime data, all of this kind of context around right now, and do something more meaningful with it. And so when we decided to start doing this with vulnerabilities, it was really about how do I take data, again, at runtime and do something novel with it. And so I can look at all of my running clusters, and then I can go look for, misconfiguration, or more importantly, vulnerabilities in those clusters in a context of, like, how is it actually deployed? The nice thing here is that this is very, very useful for a security professional or an operations person. Admittedly, this interface, this view of the world, it's not the best use case for a developer, though, right? You're not going to often have a dev come in and be like, well, I want to go see live in the environment, where this thing is running at, what namespace, and go look for vulns within that context. You might have a few who do, but that's not where they live, right? That's not a developer's daily life. And so from our perspective in Sysdig, that's not the persona we go after. That's who someone like Docker, Scout uses. That's someone who other vendors go and use. And so we took all of this data that we had in here and made it be interesting to view in slightly different ways. So I can go look for things like hasfix or has exploits or is in use, has fixes. And this basically lets me take a large number of vulnerabilities and filter it down to stuff that matters the most, again, the most right now. I can generate reports of this, and I can give it to folks to go work on, which is nice, right? It lets me basically prioritize my time better. It lets me focus on what matters the most at this point in time. But wouldn't it be great if I could take this in-use data and plug it into a workflow that a developer actually cares about, right? If I could stick it in the terminal they're working in when they're doing their scans locally, or if they're using an IDE of some sort, or they're using a Docker Scout plugin, some sort of tooling that they have in their everyday life. What can I do with it? How can I leverage it there? And that's why we've partnered with Docker and others to take this data out of our platform and bring it directly into theirs, so that when your developer is doing the analysis, they can say, oh, okay, I can see that in this container, these are the packages that are actually in use by the container or the image that I've built. These are the ones I need to care about. Everything else I should be pulling out of that image, right? I shouldn't be having to deal with those anymore. I shouldn't have to remediate those anymore. I should only care about these ones in particular. And so on the Sysdig side, this is kind of where it ends, right? It's all about this particular view and giving the operations folks access to it. But our friends here at Docker with Scout have taken this data and made it look much more interesting from a developer's perspective. And so from this point, I'm going to give it over to my partner here and let him talk more about that, about like kind of the vision they have, the cycle it goes through, and how to integrate that into your kind of everyday life. Sound good?
Thank you, Alex. Before we do that, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
Two. First question, how do you guys do this? What's the technology behind detecting which packages are in use?
Yeah, so the technology we use for this is our agent that runs on the actual infrastructure itself. And so it looks at every single system call that traverses the kernel of every single node that we're on, and it correlates those calls back to the libraries and packages that we're calling, and we're making those calls themselves. So it can figure out exactly what package is being used by the container and know exactly where it comes from within the container itself.
Right, and that works across all ecosystems, all languages.
Correct.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. Can we? So thanks
yeah,
first
yeah.
of all
I'll go over this way, and I will let you take it. I think we just have to have them flip the laptop back.
Yes. Oh, and mine actually switched itself off. Let me
All right.
back in. All right. So before we get into questions, I want to talk a little bit about how we build this integration and what you can do with this now. Sysdig has an API that we kind of call into, and the way you get started is you log into scout.docker.com. Let me do this real quick here. Although quick's relative. Let's bring this up to full screen. And the place to start is up here in the integrations section. And you can scroll down and you see a Sysdig tile here. And this Sysdig tile in this particular case is configured. So you can manage this. I could say I want to add a new one. And then it takes you through it links you to the documentation that explains to you how you need to configure the Sysdig agent, the Sysdig infrastructure to expose the runtime insights as introduced by Alex via an API. So you have to plug in like an API token, you have to select your cluster name, your environment, and then you're off to a good start. Once you've done this, effectively two things happen. Let me switch over into a different organization here. There are really two things that we're collecting from Sysdig in order to kind of help developers make better choices on where to focus their energy. This is as shown yesterday in the keynote. This is the view that effectively lists you all the images that someone has pushed in your organization. So this is just my test account, so not a bazillion images. But there is this drop-down up here that you can use to filter down by environments. Now, environments is something that Sysdig is able to communicate to us. These images are running in a particular cluster as a particular workload name. And you can name and logically group these things. So you can say this cluster is production, this other cluster is staging, or you can keep the names as reported by Sysdig. And then you can filter down the list of things to make it really easy for developers and people interested in this kind of information to know what are the images currently running in your environment X. That's already a great value add, I would say. And then we took it a step further, and this is where the in-use package information comes in. And I want to take a step back and introduce you to a concept called VEX. For that, let me just open a document real quick. Make this big. So VEX is not the acronym for vulnerability exclusions. It's actually a vulnerability exploitation exchange. And that is an emerging specification that allows providers of software to kind of publish information about particular CVEs in the context of a particular package, subcomponents included, to say, I'm affected, I'm not affected, I'm investigating. So you can really kind of specify to your consumers of your Docker images, of your, let's say, NPM projects or something else, you can say, we confirm that we are affected. And then you can do inline statements around what you expect your customers to do, your consumers. You can say, I want you to upgrade to the next available version and so on. So in this case, this particular CVE, I want to address in the context of a particular Docker image. And within that Docker image, I'm looking at one particular package. So Scout supports VEX already. VEX can be uploaded into the database, helping you internally to say, I want to I want to effectively communicate that I'm not affected by a particular CVE. You could ignore this. There's already a mitigation in place. Or you can say, I am affected, and everyone needs to upgrade to the next available base image version, for example. And we use this technology, this integration, to automatically create these VEX statements and then publish them into your Scout organization, which is effectively a mapping to your Docker Hub organization. So the data that we're getting from Sysdig is essentially mapped into a positive and a negative VEX statement. So for the packages in use, we can say, you know what, these packages are used. Sysdig told us that these are actually loaded in runtime. And with that, we say, OK, you are affected. And for the other packages that are not in use, we say, you're not affected because these things aren't loaded at runtime. And that is a VEX statement that is, from that point on, available to you. So now VEX doesn't specify, doesn't make strong assertions around what you do with these statements. Do you have to accept them? So this really boils down to trust and where are these statements coming from? Do I have to trust them? Do I have to accept them? And of course, in the Sysdig case, that it's a very strong signal when they, via our integration, tell you that this is not in use. It has a very strong meaning. Don't trust any random vec statements of the internet, right? That someone has published to Docker Hub or any other registry. Be sure to kind of validate where this information is coming from. In the context of official images, we are actively working with the official images team as part of Scout to deliver vec statements for these images. In this particular case, of course, this is trustworthy. It's part of your Docker Scout installation. And you should really kind of look into this data. So how does this look like when you attempt to use this information? So I can run a Scout command. And there are effectively two ways of looking at this. Let's scroll up to the top. There's a really high signal, besides the noise, that a package is in use. You should really look at that vulnerability, right? So if we scroll down here, this is one of our test images that we have deployed into a cluster where we have Sysdig configured. And when you scroll down, you'll see, okay, these CVEs you should really all look at because the underlying package is loaded at runtime. So this is what this package is used, is indicating here. It's coming from the Sysdig integration, and the recommendation is to update to the next fixed version of that package of that CVE. Again, this is a vec statement. It could come from other sources, but in this case, using the Sysdig integration, you get this straight out of the runtime information. Further down, you'll see that there are a bunch of in this case, BusyBox is not affected. So it's very easy to say, you know what, this is a shell. I don't need that. I should probably remove this, as Alex said, or it's fine for me to ignore this until I see a different indicator that I should really start looking at that. There are various filter options here, so I can let's take a quick look. I don't actually remember all of them. There is a vex author, which is kind of like a first attempt at saying, okay, you can specify the vex publishers that you as a consumer want to trust. So in this case, I could put in the string docker/Sysdig integration, and I would say, okay, only the statements coming from Sysdig are accepted. If I like would find a random vex statement, it would still not apply. So you would still get the CVEs reported as you would expect. There is also a way of like loading vex from the local file system and so on, but that really isn't in scope for this talk. I think that's pretty much the content that I had planned. Do you guys have any questions for us, Alex? No questions? Everything's clear? Who's going to try this out? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. Great. Let's see if we can actually find the link to the getting started. I think that's probably something that's helpful. When you there we go. Try Sysdig for free, and there's your link. There's a form to fill out, and I'm hearing good things. People have started doing that, and that puts you in touch with Sysdig. I hear it's very low touch. You don't get to talk to a salesperson directly and all that. You get a trial, and you take it from there.
Yeah, it's all pretty easy to set up. It's all containerized, so it's pretty easy to go forward with. And then lets you play around with the product and use it in fun ways.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.